Typically, we like to dive into topics for our Elden lore series that have enough in-game writing to support their own video. On occasion, we've dabbled in taking on multiple topics at once, but ideally, we want to tell cohesive stories to bring you the most accurate history possible for the denizens of the lands between. Lately, our commenters have been asking us to tackle some topics with very little written history behind them, but we wanted to face this challenge head-on and bring you the most accurate story we could for these topics with what little we can glean from items and enemy locations. For this particular request, we found that the enemy in question was deeply tied to another character we previously discussed in our short series, The Tarnished Files. Today, we're going to give you our best theory on the history of the Abductor Virgins, what they are, their purpose, and their ties to Inquisitor Giza, Rykard's personal torturer, and maybe even the sick mind behind these terrifying enemies. If this is your first time watching our Elden lore series, thank you for checking out the channel. We really appreciate you spending your time with us and letting us talk lore at you for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. If you like our content, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. YouTube has a bad habit of hiding videos by your favorite creators from you, even if you subscribe. So that bell goes a long way, not only in helping us out with the algorithm, but in making sure that you don't miss out on any episodes in our Elden lore series. I know I said it already, but whether you're a new viewer or a longtime fan, we really can't thank you enough for watching. This incredible community is the reason we keep making these videos, and your support means everything. Now let's get back to these disturbing enemies. The Abductor Virgins are certainly an enigma. These huge machines roll toward us with large, pendulum blade arms or whirligig saws, relentlessly attacking until we're either dead or pulled into their lower half to be devoured by their insides. It's obvious to see how these were inspired by Iron Maidens, both in name and appearance, acting as instruments of torture that people would be shoved inside of. But that's not all there is to these enemies. First, we want to discuss their name, which can seem like a misnomer if you're paying attention to the surface level details of their form. The abductor portion of their name goes without saying. The lower half of these enemies will open its doors and drag you inside to torture and kill you, and one particular variant at the bottom of Raya Lucaria Academy will literally abduct you, transporting you to Volcano Manor. The second half of the name, Virgin, is where the design can be misleading. By looking at the top half of the Abductor Virgin's body, we can see a woman's face and arms cradling a baby. Your first thought may be that the imagery of a young woman holding a newborn portrays anything but virginity. But if we remember that one of their main purposes is to abduct others and bring them to the Volcano Manor, we can reasonably assume the baby in their arms is actually a symbol of their purpose, to steal others away, rather than a symbol of motherhood. There may also be a more literal interpretation to the term virgin as well. It would be easy to assume that these enemies are automatons and not living creatures, but that notion can be thrown out the window upon further inspection. When an Abductor Virgin opens the doors attached to the lower half of its body in order to grab you, we can clearly see a red blood mist inside, as well as flayed skin seemingly pinned to the inside of the doors. On top of this, the tentacles that reach out to grab you and drag your tarnished inside are not tentacles at all, but long black snakes. With this in mind, we think it's fair to assume that at least some part of these enemies is still physically alive, and may have even been a human at some point. Take this a step further, and perhaps the title of Virgin comes from those deemed appropriate to create these monstrosities. If humans were used in the creation of these mobile torture devices, it's possible the only suitable vessel in the eyes of their creator was a virgin. So we now have an understanding as to where the name comes from, but who's responsible for the creation of these horrific half-living, half-mechanical beings? They're only found in areas associated with the Carian Royal Family, but the use of snakes inside the virgins themselves makes it clear that they originate from Rykard of the Volcano Manor. We believe this can be taken a step further, and not only tied back to Rykard, but specifically his Inquisitor and Master of Torture, Giza. In the past, I joked that Giza only exists in Elden Ring in order to give us access to the whirligig saw from Bloodborne, and I stand by that statement. But it just so happens, this invading spirit, who only shows up once, is integral to understanding the history of torture the Volcano Manor performed amongst those it captured. The most obvious connection between Giza and the Abductor Virgins is his weapon, Giza's Wheel. The item description even lays out this connection for us. Great iron wheel, lined with flesh-flaying blades, device of torture used by Inquisitor Giza. As the wheel spins, it causes severe pain and blood loss. The design was adopted for use as the iconic weapon wielded by Iron Virgins. We think it's fair to assume that it was Giza himself who decided his personal weapon of torture would be used as arms for the Abductor Virgins. But when facing the Abductor Virgin boss fight in the subterranean Inquisition chamber, we earn another weapon tied to Giza, the Inquisitor's Girandol. This weapon is an instrument of torture used on nobles behind the curtain at the Volcano Manor of Mount Gelmir. Its numerous spikes pierce the flesh, then singe the wounds with flame. The smell of burnt blood induces despair in the victim, a candlestick conceived by a thorough mind. As it is named for an Inquisitor, and the only Inquisitor we're aware of at the Volcano Manor is Giza, it's another fair assumption to say that this was one of his instruments of torture, and our only means of attaining it is defeating Giza's creations within his own torture chamber. We believe this is more than enough environmental evidence to tie Giza to the creation of these enemies, and given what we know of the Volcano Manor's penchant for both torture and experimentation, this comes together well. Giza wears the official's attire, which is described as a grubby blue robe worn by magisterial officials to carry out their grim tasks. Surveillance, executions, gruesome rituals, the darkest duties drive the wheels of mankind. What this tells us is that Giza likely led the seedier side of the manor while Tanith upheld the front as leader of the recusants. This means it was likely Giza who performed horrific rituals and experiments on the Albinorics we find within the Volcano Manor village. These beings are left with horrible, pulsing pustules for heads, and are better put out of their misery when we encounter them. But how exactly did the Volcano Manor come across these test subjects? The lizard men are never seen outside the walls of Rykard's village, and the recusants do not take prisoners. The only answer left to us is the Abductor Virgins. These enemies were created by Giza at the behest of Lord Rykard in order to steal test subjects from the outside world. With this context in mind, the areas in which we find them start to make a whole lot of sense. Abductor Virgins are only found in areas associated with the Carian Royal Family, Caria Manor, Raya Lucaria Academy, Redmane Castle, Mount Gelmir, and Volcano Manor. Caria Manor was once home to many Albinorics, making it the perfect place to gather test subjects from this man-made race. Raya Lucaria is the home to sorcerers, another group that would likely make for good experimentation. And finally, Redmane Castle is where the strongest went to improve themselves. If you were looking for a sturdy warrior to submit to torturous rituals, this would be the place to steal them from. Rykard could have the Abductor Virgins placed strategically within these areas associated with his family, under the guise of protection to keep his brother, sister, and mother safe, when really, he wanted to siphon off their forces to his own nefarious ends. We even have precedents for this line of thinking, if you accept the theory that the Finger Creepers are tied to Rykard, and he placed them in Caria Manor as well to block any invader's path to Rani. Ultimately, the purpose of the Abductor Virgins is to cut, rip, and torture their opponents before bringing them back to Volcano Manor, so that Giza may use them for his twisted rituals and experiments, all in the name of Lord Rykard. While it's hard to truly confirm any of this theory as 100% true, we believe the contextual evidence left behind in the lands between helps us make a solid case for this interpretation of their story. While facing one of these enemies is typically a frustrating endeavor, let's try not to forget that while their purpose may be to torture their victims, they themselves are likely victims, living with the eternal torment of being turned into these monstrosities. After all, true death does not exist in the lands between, meaning if people really were used in the creation of the Abductor Virgins, some small piece of them lives on within that festering body, probably living in eternal torment, exactly as Giza intended. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Elden Lore. Where do you think the Abductor Virgins came from? Do you have any theories that contradict ours? Just how closely do you believe Inquisitor Giza is tied to these torture machines? Why is the Virgin at the bottom of Raya Lucaria Academy the only one that can transport us to Volcano Manor? We look forward to reading all of your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.